Now, in the midst of all this, one more thing that doesn't got a lot of attention is Ukraine actually cut out the oil supply to the
Mm.
Druzhba pipeline, which are the oil supply to Hungary and the Slovakia.
Yeah,
It's I was trying to pinpoint the exact time, but it's hard to the exact time, but it's around the Monday, the 18th. That's all
yeah,
these things happen when there's a meeting going
yeah,
on in Washington. Around that time, there is also that is happening. And then also Trump was calling Orban immediately after the
yeah,
meeting with
yeah.
the Alaska meeting with Putin, basically trying to convince Orban to allow Ukraine to join EU. My understanding,
Yeah.
that's the phone call.
Yeah.
Why does Ukraine do something like that in such a crucial time?
Well, that's an excellent question. And of course, it's very difficult to give a simple and coherent answer because, I mean, it seems completely illogical. Now, I'm going to make a guess here. I think the Ukrainians and the Europeans have been talking about this together for a long, long time. The Europeans don't want to stop imports of oil and gas from Russia into Europe. And they really don't like Orban and
Mm.
they really don't like Fico. And I think they're making a major effort at the moment to try to destabilize these governments. And there is an ongoing color revolution attempt taking place in Serbia,
Yeah,
as we're
yeah,
talking about. So
yeah.
all of this, because all of these three countries are working together. So
Mhm.
this is all part of that process. And I have to say, I mean, this sounds a bit conspiracist. But with people like this, I mean, you can't
Mhm.
disregard this. I think this is all part of an attempt to try to put pressure on Orban and ultimately on Fico. The Europeans hate Orban. They don't like the fact that he has this influence that he does have over Trump, and they wanted to find some means to undermine him. And they want to do that by interfering with the supplies of oil and gas. And the Ukrainians want to do that too.
But they must understand that Trump doesn't shouldn't like this because Trump is trying to convince Orban to help Ukraine in some way to join the EU. And then something
Yes,
like this happens. I mean, how can Trump be happy about this?
you would
Right?
have you would have thought that he would not be happy about this, and you would expect that Orban would complain about this to Trump.
No.
But Trump comes across to me as a deeply, deeply uh, confused man. I don't think he has ever really got on top of this problem. And I don't think he really understands how all of the various different pieces move. So at the moment, at that meeting on Monday, he wanted to basically calm the Europeans down. He just had this meeting
Mhm.
with Putin, and the Europeans were very upset and angry about it. So his purpose of that meeting, very unwisely, was to lead the Europeans to think that actually, really, I'm on your side. We're
Mhm.
going to talk about we're going to talk about security guarantees for Ukraine. We're going to talk about a meeting between uh, Putin and Zelensky, and I will be there too. And so he didn't want to be hard on them because he wanted to win them over. And so he just looks the other way as his friends, Orban's pipeline is destroyed. A a strong leader conducting a clear policy on behalf of the United States would not behave like that. He would have simply said to the Europeans, look, I've just heard that
Mhm.
Ukraine has just attacked this pipeline. That is completely unacceptable unless I have a promise from you now that that stops all further intelligence assistance to Ukraine ends. And I
Mhm.
want to have that commitment from you now.
Mhm.
That's what a strong leader
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's what you'd expect the president of the United States to do. But Trump never does this. He always tries to split the difference and creates massive confusion and muddle in the process.
Well, one thing that I find very confusing for his behavior is this letter from Melania Trump to Putin. I never quite understand the purpose of that because if you read the letter, what it says that she said that Mr. Putin, you can single-handedly restore children's melodic laughter in protecting the innocence of these children. So she basically, to me, the letter is about children that somehow Putin can single-handedly help
yeah,
them, which sounds to me like she's blaming Putin for not helping them
yeah.
since it's such an easy thing for you. I think when Putin read a letter like that, Putin cannot be particularly happy about this. So what's the purpose of a letter like that?
Well, I mean, it was. I think it was frankly not just a bad letter, but even a sinister letter. One gets the sense that Melania is very much on the side of the
Of Ukraine.
Europeans and all of
Hmm.
these people,
Hmm.
and that she's not doesn't really agree with Trump's attempts to try to make up with the Russians in some way, and that she's been a consistent. She's constantly pushing against this. I mean, supposedly. I mean, well, Trump himself said that he has these good calls with Putin, and then he goes and he meets Melania, and she's complaining to him about the fact that the Russians are attacking Kiev again, and
Hmm.
it seems that she has that kind of influence. So clearly, yes, it was an attempt to blame Putin for the plight of children. It's, I think, fairly obvious what this refers to,
Yeah, yeah.
which is this narrative, which is it's only a narrative. I mean, I can tell you as a lawyer who used to do this kind of work about child abduction cases, that the
Hmm.
Russians have abducted 20,000 children from
Hmm.
Ukraine. Melania clearly believes this story, which is a complete fantasy. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not complete facts, it's a complete fiction, but
Hmm.
she clearly believes this story or pretends that she does. So she gave Trump this letter. She's probably very angry that Trump was meeting this evil man.
Hmm.
Trump weakly passes it on. And apparently there's been some pushback, so the letter isn't quite explicit. But as you correctly said, I don't think Putin was impressed or would have taken it very well, frankly. I don't think Putin would have been happy
Hmm.
about the fact that Trump called him even at the same time as Zelensky and all of those European officials were in the White House.
Yeah.
Actually,
Hmm.
I think that Putin almost certainly would have seen that as an attempt to put pressure on him.
Uh-huh. Hmm. Well, I did a program about the Melania Trump's letter. I just
Yeah,
wanted my viewers to, my
yeah,
Chinese viewers to know what is
yeah.
going on there. Lots of people commented saying, well, how about the children in Gaza? Does
Mm.
Melania Trump care about that?
Well,
I think that's a good point.
well, it's an excellent point. In fact, I mean, if anybody can bring melodious laughter back to children, it's not Putin, it's Trump.
Yes,
He can
yes.
tell Netanyahu, you stop tomorrow. If you don't
Mhm.
stop, you no more economic or military aid from the United States.
In the meantime, right now, just
Well,
happening when they were negotiating in Alaska, there's another thing. The State Department just stopped issuing visa for Gaza children. That's
yes, I
exactly
know.
what they did.
I know. Yeah.
So why
Yes.
didn't Melania Trump to put pressure on Trump for that? So
Well, exactly.
yeah.
Well, exactly. Oh, she doesn't like. I get the sense she doesn't like
Mhm.
Russia. I mean,
No,
she's internalized the
mhm.
usual assumptions about Russia that many people
Yeah.
have. I suspect there's lots of arguments between the two of them. Anyway, that's my guess.
You see, that's the difference between the Chinese and probably even the East view about the First Lady. That
Yes,
in China, it's deeply resentment, against if any women, the wives
yes,
involved in the husband's affair. That's deeply
yes,
resented, you
yes,
know. Whereas in the West, that seems like a good thing. That seems like
yes. I
almost
know.
encouraged to do
Yes,
so.
I know. Absolutely. It's the same in Russia, by the way. The
Uh-huh.
Russians are the same as the Chinese. I don't know whether you remember, but Gorbachev,
Hmm.
his wife, Raisa,
Yeah.
played
Hmm.
a very big role in his policies. And of course, she was very, very much somebody who wanted rapprochement with the West. She took
Uh-huh.
very strongly liberal views. Um, the Russian people didn't like it at all. It was very, very widely resented there. I mean, it was seen as another example of the extent to which Gorbachev had become westernized.
Hmm.
Mhm.
To be honest, I actually think as a couple, regardless of what you do, I really think that the couple should do their own respective things,
Yeah,
not too much interfere with each other. I just never think that's a good idea. you know?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, can I just say, I mean, Catherine and I, my wife, are
Mhm.
Westerners, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly the stance that we take. I
Mhm.
mean, we each are aware of what the other does. She's an
Yeah.
academic. I do
Mhm.
all the things that I do, but I mean, we don't have to. We don't give each other scorecards every day and ask the other advice. I mean, that's absurd.
Exactly. I mean, the same thing with
Or rather, give unsolicited
yeah.
advice to.
Well, the same thing with my husband. I think I
Yeah,
enjoy the fact that I can do whatever I want.
exactly.
I'm sure lots of things he might not agree with me. We even
Yes.
sometimes voted for different people, when
Well, there you
elections
go.
comes. But I never try to change him, and nor
Yes.
does he trying to change
Yes.
me
Yes.
on these kind of things. I
Yes.
think that's best way, just give each other room, right? So
Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, the Americans have invented this concept of the first lady, which, of
yeah.
course, is no, or the first spouse, I suppose, when we get the next, when we eventually do get a woman president, which,
Hmm.
of course, has no existence in the U.S. Constitution or U.S. law. But I mean, this is something that has happened, and you're absolutely correct. It's absurd. It's wrong, actually.
Yeah. Okay, so moving forward, if it's now questionable whether there's going to be a one-on-one meeting between Zelensky and Putin, if there is a meeting where there seems the location is a problem, because
Oh
Putin talked about the Moscow, and I don't think Zelensky wants to go to Moscow.
no,
And it's questionable if Trump is going to join them. But so if not Moscow, there's a few other places. One is Geneva, but I don't think Putin wants to go to Geneva. Geneva is
no,
supposed to be a neutral place, but they changed that themselves, right?
yeah,
And the other is Belarus Minsk. But my question with Minsk is that there has been two Minsk agreement already.
yeah.
So a third one, I don't know how good that can be. And of course, somebody proposed to Turkey and also Beijing. Now, what do you think? Where could be the best location?
Well, I think the most likely location is Istanbul,
Okay.
and it's a fact that Putin had a telephone call.
Uh-huh.
I think the day before yesterday with Erdogan, and if you look at what the Russians have been saying, they've been very, very clear that the negotiation process is the one that is ongoing
Mhm.
between Russian and Ukrainian negotiating teams, which has been meeting in Istanbul. They've now had 3 meetings with each other. The Russians have said this format needs to be strengthened and expanded. They've talked about setting up 3 working parties. They've said that the delegation heads could be upgraded.
Mhm.
They've left it open that once these groups meet and if progress towards a settlement is made, then Putin and Zelensky could meet. But if that's correct, then the logical venue would be Istanbul.
Okay.
And I think that's most likely where it will be. I don't imagine that Zelensky will want to go to Moscow.
Mhm.
Putin will not want to go to Geneva. As you
Mhm.
absolutely rightly say, the Russians don't consider Switzerland to be a neutral
Mhm.
country
Mhm.
anymore. In fact, they
Mhm.
consider it to be an unfriendly country. Budapest has also been proposed, but that's also in the European Union. I don't think the Russians would want to go there.
Mhm.
Beijing, I mean, they'd be very happy to go there, but I don't think Zelensky would want to
Well,
go there.
uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
I think Istanbul is by far the most likely place
If it happens, because like I
if it
said,
happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I watched you and John Mearsheimer and
Yeah.
Glenn Deason, right? That conversation. It was very good. It's explained a lot of
Yeah.
things for me because
Yeah.
it's so confused,
Yes. Yes.
so confusing the whole thing.
Yes.
And then we will see whether it happens. But one thing is the Europeans, right? I think in your show you explained very, very well about the Europeans why they see this whole thing as such a
Yeah.
catastrophe for them
Yeah.
if they have a peace agreement or something. Can you explain that to my audience? So,
Yes. From their point of view, from the point of view of the European powers,
mhm,
I mean, they're weak, they're disorganized, and they have a very, very long history of rivalry with each other.
yeah,
They have, over the last 80 years, because of the United States, avoided wars with each other. But that doesn't mean that all the tensions that exist in Europe have gone away. And they've also embarked on this very ambitious and complicated process of European construction, which has led to the European Union, which also is having deeply unhappy and difficult outcomes. If the United States leaves Europe, if the United States leaves Ukraine, then a number of things start to happen. The European Union itself starts to become unsustainable because it needs the United States to be there to keep it together. The Europeans themselves, with their very, very fragmented and broken economies, then risk increasing rivalries with each other. And of course, they also have the great nightmare of being left with the Russians by themselves. And the Russians are, they've managed to make the Russians very, very angry with them. And
Mhm.
as we can all see, Russia is not just a much bigger country than any other European country, it is also orders of magnitude more powerful.
Mhm.
So the Europeans, for all of these various reasons, are desperate to keep the Americans in Europe. And in order to keep the Americans in Europe, they need to keep the Americans in Ukraine. If the Americans pull out of Ukraine,
Mhm.
then they might start to have second doubts about whether they should stay in Europe. So this is what European policy ultimately is all about. If it means prolonging the war in Ukraine, if it means destroying Ukraine, if it means creating a situation where there is an outright Russian victory, all of that is better than seeing the Americans go. it's, I have to say, it's a strategy appalls me. I am ashamed of it,
Mhm.
given the history of all of these countries. But
Mhm.
it explains for your viewers, your Chinese viewers,
Mhm.
why you saw all of those pictures of those European leaders
Yeah.
going to Washington,
Mhm.
carrying before Trump. These are the countries that 100 years ago were mighty powers.
Yeah.
Britain and its empire,
Mhm.
France and its
Uh-huh.
empire, Germany, all of these countries, they're now there,
Defeated.
begging the Americans to stay because they've become, in effect, marginal players. And the only way in which they can retain influence, preserve a kind of unstable stability in Europe itself, and keep the Russians,
Mhm.
away from their door, is by keeping the Americans in. There is a very, very famous quip that was made by the first NATO Secretary General back in the 1940s, and his name is Lord Ismay. He was British, and he said the entire purpose of NATO is to keep the Americans in,
Mhm.
the Russians out,
Mhm.
and the Germans down.
Mhm.
Nobody cares about the Germans anymore. Nobody really
Mhm.
believes they're a
Mhm.
threat. But it's
Yeah.
basically about keeping the Europeans
Mhm.
at peace with each other, keeping the Russians out. And for that, you need to keep the Americans in.
Well, well, then my question is this whole EU project.
Mm,
Because the idea is to you put all these small countries, smaller countries, right, relative speak to Russia and to
mm,
US, you put them all together so you become more powerful,
yeah,
right? You're all together, you're economically have more opportunities, and everybody should grow together. Supposedly, I my understanding is that you can because you're bigger now, so you can, if needed militarily, you have the NATO, to protect you. So the
yeah.
whole idea of the European Union is that you can stand alone as a powerful unit.
You
That
know,
doesn't
this
work.
is no, something, Sophia. This is my great mistake in life, because for most of my life I was an absolute strong supporter, first of the European Economic Community, and then it became the European
Mhm.
Community.
Mhm.
And when the European Union was first launched in the 1990s, I still thought this was a good thing. The
Uh-huh.
idea was to bring together all the nations of Europe to secure peace in Europe, to build up Europe's economy,
Uh-huh.
because Europe lacked. economies of scale, like you saw in the United States and
Hmm.
China,
Hmm.
even to some extent in Russia.
Yeah.
And I thought that this would work out. This is the right way for Europe to go. And I have to say this, it has turned out to be a disaster. This is where I failed completely as an analyst. I mean, there were people who were warning
Hmm.
that it's not going to turn out this way,
Yes.
that uh, bringing Europe together in that way would mean that you'd have a Europe that was far less than the sum of its parts, as we say. You know, that it would be not, you would not get a stronger Europe, you would get a weaker Europe.
Hmm.
And that is exactly how it has turned out. It means that politics has drained away from the European countries because politics inside the European countries no longer has any meaning anymore, because you elect people, but they're not accountable to you properly. They are responsible to the secretariat, if you like, the commission in Brussels. I mean, that's where the decisions, the big decisions are made now. You have never created institutions at the center that could develop any kind of general economic policy. And ultimately, the foreign policy that you have created is the narrowest and the most objectionable that you could possibly have. So instead of a greater Europe, by which a greater Europe, I mean a better Europe, we have a smaller, weaker, uglier, more marginal Europe, a Europe which now seems to be in a state of appalling decay.
Hmm.
So this, as I said, it's very sad for me, but you saw it on display at that meeting in the White House. I mean, they all go to cower before Donald Trump. I mean, it's not as if this
Yeah.
is Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy or some,
Hmm.
great leader of the
Hmm.
United States. This is a man that many people in America don't take seriously. And yet the Europeans are there, groveling in front of him. I mean, what more disgraceful and
Hmm.
shameful performance could you see than that?
Yeah.
And nothing illustrates better, as I said, the decline of Europe than this.
Yeah. The seven dwarfs. That's what
Yeah,
what
the
it says.
seven dwarfs, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well.
the mighty powers, the
Hmm.
countries that carved up China. Hmm?
Yeah. Yeah.
That the Germans were in
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Tianjin, and the
Yeah.
British and the China and the French had
Uh-huh.
Shanghai. That
Yeah.
carved up of Shanghai, and the British had Hong Kong, and all of that. And now they're reduced to this level. Well, you could say there's a justice in
Yeah, yeah, could be, yeah.
it.
Well, I guess it's just that Europe lack a real leader, I guess.
Mm,
When you put everything together, becomes such a big entity with so many
mm,
countries. You need
mm,
some powerful leader to
mm.
can really lead the place, but they don't
Yeah.
have one, I
No,
guess. So,
no. Or and the political setup in Europe
hmm.
works against any
Okay.
such person
Uh-huh.
ever appearing,
Yeah. Yeah.
because anybody like that would have to first become a strong leader in one of the national
Hmm.
states. And that means that the EU centre, as I refer to it, would immediately see that person as a threat to
Yeah.
itself and would
Hmm.
do everything it could to undermine him.
Yeah. For example, Orban, for example, I would,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.